Let's start the next section of problems in the bronze section. Uh, let's go with the cow signal. So I'm going to try to do something different. I'm going to try and read the problem out, solve it on my own, and then once I solve it and pass all the test cases, I will then go through my final answer. Okay, so Pessy and her cow friends are playing as their favorite cow superheroes. Of course, everyone knows that any self respecting superhero needs a signal to call them to action. Bessie has drawn a special signal on a sheet of M by N paper. But this is too small, much too small. Bessie wants to amplify the signal so it's exactly k times bigger in each direction. The signal will consist of only dots and crosses. The first line of input contains M, N, and K, which are separated by spaces. The next M lines contain a length N string, which describe the picture. We should output a Km by Kn grid that outputs the enlarged picture. So this is a 5 by 4 output here, and we want to increase this by scale 2. So we get this. So what we notice is that if you just look at this first row, the the row is twice as long, and it'll also the same row will take up both this row and this row. So in the end, we'll have this row be k times as long, and it'll also appear k times. So here k is 2, so this is twice as long, and it appears twice. Okay. Let's try and solve it. Oh, let's. Okay. We're given the order is M and K. Okay. And M and K. Okay, I didn't put read. That's fine. So we need input. We need. Let's create a 2 by 2 array, size M by N. Okay, so we read the input. Oh, whoops. Ooh, okay, you should be char. Ah. Okay. Um. Okay, let's see if this works. And voila. Okay, so let's talk about this answer. The first thing to notice is that m and n are very small. They're in between 1 and 10. So why does this matter? So if m is the number of rows and n is the number of columns, this tells us the overall size of the input. So the maximum size we can have is a 10 by 10 grid, which is 100. And then if we want to amplify k times in each direction, would mean we'd have to, worst case scenario, make it 10 times as big on the x-axis and 10 times as big on the y-axis, right? So then the maximum size of our output would be the maximum size of our input times 10 in both directions. Since we're timesing 10 for the rows and the columns, we would times it by 100 because that's 10 times 10. So the maximum size of our overall grid would be 100 times 100, which is 10,000. So since it's only 10,000, we can just go one by one and figure out what we output. So first thing first, we just read in the input. We have m, n, and k. We create a 2D array which has m rows and n columns, and we just read in the input. And then from there, we know that the output is going to be k times as large in each direction. So the hint here, in the output format, is that you should output km lines and k with kn characters. So we'll have km rows, and in each row we'll have kn columns. So therefore, now when we're gonna push out the output, now we don't go until m, we go until m times k and n times k. Yeah. And now what we output is I by k and j by k. Why is that? Okay, so let's just look at the rows, right? The example they give is xxx dot, xxx dot, and we want to output xxx, xxx dot dot, right? So now since we're going until m times k and n times k, this is going to be our range. So now when we look at this, so this is what we want ideally. So now we know we're iterating, what is that, 8 times, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Oops, that's too much. The first one is going to be I divided by k. I is 0, and therefore since k is a positive integer, 0 by that is going to be 0. So we look at just input of 0. Let's not care about j by k for now. So essentially we look at the 0th element. Okay, since in this problem k was 2, right? So 0 over 2 rounds down to 0 because we're dealing with integers here. So this, we look at the 0th index, which is this. Now 1 over 2 is 0 because we're dealing again with integers. So we look at the 0th index of the original string, which is again x. And now we do 2 over 2, which is going to be the index I, which is now 2, and over 2, which is k. So then this is now also going to be, this is now going to be the first index in the original string, which is going to be x. And then here 3 over 2 is still 1, so we look at the first index. 4 over 2 is 2, so now we look at the second index. 5 over 2 is 2, second index. 6 over 2 is 3, so we look at the third index. 1, so we look, so the dot and the dot. So that's how we go from here to here, which is exactly what we want. So why I over k works is now because we are going over the much bigger ranges, and this is how we map from the bigger range to the initial small input. So the reason why I by k and j by k works is because since we're dealing with integers, we always round down. And then this line, I'm not sure if it's needed, but it did specify that we should output k by m lines with k by n characters. And if we don't have this, then in the end, we would have this output with a new line at the end, which is not what we want. So this is just being a bit pedantic and making sure that we have exactly m times k rows and n times k columns. And yeah, that works. So voila.